I lived in the US for 19 years, and after leaving and coming to Canada, here are 6 very random Canadian things that really surprised me that I want to share with you today. One of the very first things someone asked me when I moved to Canada is if I had tried a beaver tail. I was not ready for that question. I was abhorred by the concept that people would hunt beavers knowing that they're such keystone species, take their tails, and eat them as a pastry or as a delicacy. I am telling you, the horror in my mind, the horror when somebody asked me that. I just could not believe that it was so popular that people went around asking if I've tried a beaver tail because it was something I absolutely had to try now that I lived in Canada. Oh my God. Before you leave this video traumatized, you have to know that BeaverTails is not actually a beaver tail, which is what I thought. Without any context, my mind really went wild. But BeaverTails are actually a chain restaurant here in Canada known mainly for their products, which are fried dough pastries known as BeaverTails. So they are individually foot stretched to resemble a beaver's tail, which is where they get their name, and they have different toppings added to them to make one delicious treat. When I've had the opportunity to finally try one, they are indeed so delicious. So if you, I don't know if there's a chain or one of these in the US anywhere, but if you have the chance to try one, I definitely recommend it. They are so delicious. As we know, the US likes to do their own thing with their units of measure, but most of the world in Canada uses the metric system. So something that really surprised me, and I was kind of like, what? When I first went to a grocery store in Canada, and still kind of amuses me today, is actually this. So let me show you. So in Canada, because they use the metric system, gallons isn't a unit of measure, so we don't see gallon jugs of milk being sold. In Canada, they sell milk bags. The only other place I've seen this is Mexico. So usually what I do is I buy this 3 liter big bag of milk with 3 little liter bags of milk in it. And then it's very common here where, my refrigerator is a bit of a mess. People use these milk jugs for their milk because it comes in bags. Something else that they sell, of course, is the 2-liter cartons, but definitely not gallons of milk. And I think it's just so interesting that they sell their milk in bags. The next few things aren't so much random, but more so important things that I think everyone should be aware of. Because in the US, I don't know what your experience is, but I really never heard much about Canada. So here are just some important things that I think everyone should know. To start off, in Canada, there is no president. There's a prime minister. And another really important thing is that Canada does not have states. They have provinces and territories. Another important, really cool thing, in my opinion, is that there are 2 official languages in Canada, both English and French. I knew that they spoke English in Canada, but I didn't actually know about the French. That was new to me. In Canada, the population is approximately 41 million, but in the US, it's 341 million. When I first found out that Canada was only about 12% of the US population, I was really surprised. And the last one, which I would think a lot of people would know this, but it's come up that maybe a lot of people don't, is that they don't use the same currency. Canada has Canadian dollars in the US, while the US has US dollars, and they are not a 1-to-1 ratio. To add to the list of the things that the US likes to do their own way is the way they tell temperature. In Canada, like most of the world, they use Celsius, and in the US, they use Fahrenheit. And for the life of me, I have really struggled getting a feel for temperature in Celsius. So when someone would tell me that on a really hot day, it was, 28 degrees. 28 degrees doesn't sound very hot to me, but it's actually in the 80s, so it is very hot. Another very random thing of Canadians that I learned when I moved to Canada was the existence of Tim Hortons. I'm very surprised that, given that I grew up in Wisconsin, that I never heard of a Tim's Hortons, but I never did until I was approaching the border through Michigan, and especially now that I live in Canada. So Canada has Tim Hortons, which I see as almost like the equivalent of a Dunkin' Donuts or a Starbucks in the US. It is very well known. I mean, you have Tim Hortons everywhere, like on rest stops and every streets in major cities. Tim Hortons is everywhere. It's a very large coffee house chain. So they have pastries, they have donuts. They're very known for their Timbits, little donut holes. They also have food. So they have a lot of delicious treats. I personally do really like Timmy's. I go to Timmy's quite often. I like the rewards program. And I was just very surprised that I never heard of Tim Hortons growing up, ever. I never knew Tim Hortons was a thing or that I existed until I moved here. To add to the very random list of things that the US likes to do different is their zip codes. So in Canada, they use postal codes, not zip codes, and they're just what a zip code would be. The only difference is that there's letters and numbers, not just numbers. So for example, a zip code in Milwaukee, where I grew up, would have been like 53221. When I was in Waterloo, my postal code was something like N2L1G4 or something random like that. It's just very confusing to me, and it has taken a while for me to remember that there are numbers and letters, and it really threw me off during my first year. Like, what do you mean there's numbers in my zip code? I just found that so random. So those were just a few random things that made me laugh when I learned about them, and other important things that I feel people should be aware of. But please let me know in the comments if there's anything else that you want to know about Canada specifically.